wrong now. Oh, there we go. Good. I didn't do one wrong. Thank you guys so much. Let's give a big round of applause for the movie. That was amazing. I think it's really poignant. We're here in Red Hook, and that you got to see what the daily life still affects this community here and how we need change. And I am asking you to think about participating in making Red Hook have a better future for itself by getting engaged in some of the issues that I brought up at the beginning, and also hand it over to our panelist, Adam from the movie, the filmmaker for the movie, and I'm going to introduce our other panelist who is a longtime advocate for Red Hook that I have worked side by side with for many years. Is our moderator for today's program is Carlos Menchaca, our former city council member who represented Red Hook in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. During his time in office, Carlos fought to protect maritime uses on the waterfront and led direct negotiations with New York City Economic Development, the EDC, that resulted in reactivation of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. He also championed community-centered land use and economic development initiatives. Most recently, Carlos completed a leadership in government fellowship with Open Society Foundation, where he focused on storytelling as a tool for social change, continuing his commitment to civic engagement, policy, and elevating community voices in shaping the future of our city. One of my best friends, Carlos Menchaca.
Hi, buenas noches, everyone. I'm gonna ask a few questions for Adam, and then we're gonna hand it over to you. We want to hear questions from all of you and what maybe has inspired you in this conversation. We just watched the movie. Can we all just stand up and just do a little bit of? I'm gonna invite you to, if you'd like, to stand up, just to kind of get that blood flowing. Do a little stretch. Okay. Take a little breath in and out.
Thank you.
And then I invite you to sit down. I'll also ask you, as you're asking your question, let's keep it short so we can get through as many questions as we can. And if you're going to make a comment, same thing. Thank you. So Adam, this film, I've seen it a few times now. And I know you've been kind of on a circuit in some ways to get communities to not just engage with this film, but to hopefully inspire them. What inspired you to make this film in the first place?
Well, it was, as I said at the top, it was really, I thought that the current examples of how highways have divided communities, how highways have divided cities, were academic, were inaccessible, were not particularly visual. And that's not to say anything negative about the existing work, because again, I would not be able to do anything that I do without the existing work. But what I wanted to do again was really meet people where they were, was to present it in a very visual way, present it in a very accessible way that you don't have to know anything about urban history, you don't have to know anything about architecture. Just to present it in a way that people can understand.
There's that moment in the splice, what's it called, a splice, or where?
Oh sure, the before and afters.
Yeah. Is that what it's called, before and afters? That's what kind of kills me. I don't know if that is for you too, but that was.
Well, those are the most fun to put together. I mean, fun is maybe the wrong word, but it's always fascinating to see those really stark aerial before and afters. I live in Europe, in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. And Rotterdam was completely leveled in World War II. I'm American, I'm from South Florida. But
that's a South Florida accent, I hear.
Yeah, exactly. I love boiled peanuts. Sorry, that's something that I've recently realized about myself. But Rotterdam was completely destroyed. And you see these aerial before and afters of the city, and it's so stark. And what I like about the photography, just the aerial photography, and in New York we have some incredible resources for not just aerial photography, but on the ground photography from the 40s, is that it's objective, or objective to the extent that is possible. It's one thing to read about the destruction of thousands of units of housing, and it's another to just see it. And because it can be hard to imagine, right? Like, how can such destruction take place?
Was it 150,000 people?
In New York, it was 250,000, a 250,000. And that's likely an underestimate, because that was counting, that number actually comes from, all these displacement numbers come from calculations. So we know how many households were displaced, but not how many individuals. So what I do when I say 150,000, and what Kara was doing, is apply a multiplier just based on the average population. This all comes from the census. So it was 3.2. So, 500 units of housing equates to around like 1,800 people displaced.
Right.
But that does not necessarily reflect the actuality of the situation. Because as we know, these units, as Professor Archer was saying, they became increasingly overcrowded, they became increasingly subdivided, unofficially. So we really have no idea about the exact numbers of people displaced, but what you can do with the photos is just show. You still don't get an idea of the numbers, but you see the vast area that is destroyed to build these things.
So I'm going to ask the audience really quick. Raise your hand if you live in Red Hook. If you live in Red Hook, raise your hand. Woo! Okay, great. Red Hook is in the house. Raise your hand if you live within walking distance or maybe visual distance, you can see it, of the BQE. Raise your hand. Okay, awesome. Okay, we'll stop there. So, we have a lot of folks that are interacting with it, and Red Hook plays a big role in this story. Kind of, the visuals are pretty big. The activist from Red Hook, Cecile, gave us a really great, kind of sums it up. Brooklyn Heights gets the promenade, Red Hook gets the shaft. Tell us a little bit about what that was for you to kind of putting together, and you're in Red Hook right now. This is the first time you've shown this film in Red Hook.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the effect on Red Hook, and the reason I start the film with Red Hook is because Red Hook of all of the neighborhoods got the shortest end of the stick. Part of that is geography, but part of it is the community that was here. Red Hook gets divided, and north of Hamilton, what is now Carroll Gardens, used to be considered part of Red Hook. But Carroll Gardens really develops because of that division along Hamilton and Hicks. It creates this division that gives rise to a new neighborhood. And then there's the associated demographic changes that result. So Red Hook really gets screwed over the most, basically, compared with any place else along the entire BQE right of way. And those, the effect is concrete. It's literally a trench through a 200-foot wide trench that was formerly Hamilton Avenue, but now is now is the BQE leading to the tunnel. I took the bus to get here, and the B61.
Yep.
Exactly. And I don't know exactly what happened. I think it missed a run, but whatever.
It's always that way. The B61 is notoriously horrible.
Well, and the route is quite, it has to take quite a route around the tunnel, around the entrance to the tunnel, around that big bend. And there is a nice park at the top there that it was very active. It's actually kind of beautiful. But you think about what could have been instead. I'll end it there.
Well, I kind of want to open up to the community, or you can finish your thought? Or?
No, I
Okay.
finished my thought. As I said, the reason I like doing the videos is because I can just press play, so I don't have to think off the top of my head.
Well, let's hear from folks. If you have any questions, I have more questions, but I want to offer the opportunity in the back. Give us your name, first name, and then.
Hello, Matthew Morgan.
Matthew.
Big fan of Segregation by Design.
Thank you.
Follow them on Instagram, follow
TikTok
Segregation
and
right
all
on
that
Instagram
stuff,
plug.
yeah.
Thank you.
What would you say, like, where do you fall in terms of, not just BQE, but in terms of, in general, dealing with highways within cities? Like, there's capping, and then there's getting rid of it altogether. Some parts I'm like, yeah, I guess capping's cool, you can put a park on top of it, you can kind of reconnect these communities, but other parts just like, just get rid of all of this and just give it back to the communities. Where would you say, like, because, I mean, I have a job, so I can't do as much research. Is there any research that shows one way is better for a community? One's cheap, you know, you have to take into financial things as well.
That's a one-size-fit-all answer.
I'm lucky in that my job is related to camping and boulevardization, so I can, to some extent, combine the two. But that is the question, right? Like, what is the solution?
Right.
And I mentioned at the top the RCP program, the Reconnecting Communities program, which was something made by the Biden administration to some extent. It was as part of the IIJ, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the RCP was fairly vague. So again, this is the Reconnecting Communities program. The idea was that the administration took up the language of Professor Archer to some extent. She's incredible. She's coming out with a new book soon about this whole topic, about how highways have been used to divide. But they took up that language without really backing up their assertions. They just said highways have been used to divide, which some of us know is true, but that's not a great way to just sort of plopping it down as a fact without providing these examples. Why did I say that? Because the RCP was vague, and the solutions that they endorsed, one of them indeed was, so this is actually part of my ongoing PhD project, but the solution they endorsed was capping, so what they call mitigation. So that's where you keep the right of way, but you try to reduce the impact on the surrounding neighborhoods. So capping. Boulevardization, which is where you transform the right of way into multi-use. So it's not just for cars, it's also bikes and light rail, potentially. That's what they did in San Francisco. Light rail is good, but it's not gonna happen there. But it's where you transform the right of way, you make it multimodal. That's what we did up in the Sheridan. That's a project I've been involved with up in the Bronx. We took out a freeway there, made it into a boulevard. So it has crosswalks now, it has bike lanes, the lanes are a lot narrower. So again, capping, mitigation, and then the third one is full removal. And that's what they've done in Rochester, New York. And they've done that in San Francisco and where I live in the Netherlands. So there's those three strategies that they've sort of endorsed. It's all different now that the RCP is, with the current administration. But the funding for the RCP basically went out the door already, so these projects are still being built. So there are these three strategies that they've endorsed again. Capping, boulevardization, removal. It really depends on the context. I know that's kind of a frustrating answer. It depends. I personally would love removal, but the fact of the matter is, I am not, I live in Europe, I'm from South Florida, I'm not embedded in these communities, someplace like the Cross Bronx is something I'm very familiar with. When I was first getting started out in my day job, I was saying, there's an ongoing study to study how to mitigate the impact of the Cross Bronx. And I was just saying, well, let's just remove it and lay a light rail down there or something, across borough route. But the fact of the matter is, the land use has changed around the Cross Bronx, and there are a lot of businesses that rely on the Cross Bronx, that rely on access to shipping that is created by that. And Susaneck would. There are solutions for dealing with freight, for dealing with passenger traffic, but it's not a one size fit all. Like I would love to say just remove it like they did in Rochester, but Rochester was not a very busy highway, so it was. I mean, it's Rochester, New York. It's a small city. That's not to say removal hasn't worked everywhere. In Seoul, South Korea, they had a highway that went right through the middle of their downtown. They removed it.
The one in the Netherlands where they had that canal.
Yeah, in Utrecht.
That was fascinating.
In Utrecht, yeah. And I use that as an example quite a lot. But what both Utrecht, well, I like to use Seoul because it's a big city. Utrecht is fairly small, it's very dense. It's a beautiful city. But both of those cities took that same route of removal. And what they did in conjunction with removal, Utrecht rebuilt its tram system. It rebuilt its local light rail. And then Seoul built 2 parallel subway lines. Because the idea, we're not trying to eliminate these tricks. We're just trying to make them happen in more sustainable ways.
Right.
And especially freight. That's a whole other animal. But the BQE is gonna, as Tiffany Ann said, it's complicated because it is a long corridor. It is a corridor that touches many different land uses and serves many different purposes. Now look, I think in terms of passenger travel, we need to improve transit, right? We need to build the IBX, we need to build the Queens Link. We need to improve transit to deal with it.
And the film kind of talks about that too, that
Yeah,
the
sorry,
traffic
that's
doesn't,
all.
it's okay, we're gonna,
I have the next question.
But that is the question, right? That is the question, like, what is the solution?
I heard the Blue Highway might be a solution
Well,
to the
well,
freight
the
issue.
Blue
Here's the
Highway-
next question.
and Red Hook is very smart with some ideas too, so I know Red Hook has some solutions as well. Question, your name?
Yeah, my name's Melissa.
Melissa.
Hi.
Hi.
I lived in Red Hook for a handful of years and just recently moved to Long Island City. TMI, I'm only sharing that because a lot of people in Red Hook say they don't want Red Hook to turn into Long Island City. So that's just like a funny thing that I'm not experiencing firsthand. There was a couple things that I just read the Power Broker. I'm like 100 pages away from finishing it, but I'm just saying there were a couple things that I think everyone here should know that wasn't in the movie, which in the film
Bonding
or whatever,
power.
that I think is important. The film was great,
It's
but
EPTA
Robert
issue.
Moses did not drive. He had a driver, and so a lot of the circumstances he was creating, he didn't have to experience firsthand. Another thing was he advocated for and got fare hikes for subway riders to subsidize his projects. And I'm sharing that because now we have congestion pricing, and it's the first time that drivers are needing to understand what it's like to pay for public transit. And then also, just since we're in this like really polarized political environment, Rockefeller was the governor, and that family owned Citibank, right? Rockefeller, the governor, was the one that really wanted the MTA to be formed so that they could get money from Triborough to fund the subway, because Tiffany Ann mentioned deferred maintenance, and that actually is most eloquently seen with the subway system, and how like desperately it is behind in the $50 billion number that the MTA put out for their 5-year plan is actually like probably like really under budget for like what the subway needs. Anyways, so those are the things I just wanted to say to like level the playing field. One thing that I think that's coming up with the BMT project in particular,
BMT,
the
the Brooklyn Marine Terminal project.
Yeah,
How many
that's the
people know
big-
about that project? Just raise your hand.
Oh, they all know because I always give them a hard time when they walk in.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, great.
Find that position before you leave here.
Yeah.
There was a
So-
petition to sign. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the, so, yeah, we know Red Hook is, also Tiffany Ann is on the task force for, or an advisory board for transit. So just connecting the dots of like someone in the movie that's actually on the project that's happening now.
Yeah.
I think she's a part of the Regional Plan Association. Yeah,
Yeah, for transportation.
thank you. Yeah, Yeah, she's the head of that advisory
Also,
task
if you ever need
task
anyone
force
to
or something.
moderate a panel, she is the absolute best.
Yeah. She didn't know how to answer my questions when I emailed her though. I don't know how much power they're giving to the advisory board if that sheds any light into the process of the BMT. So I think one thing that's also in the book is how important density is to make public transit successful, and that's why it works so well in New York, and that's why it hasn't really worked so well in the suburbs, because people need to drive to transit and then take it into the city. So the amount of housing they're proposing for Red Hook is a lot, like 13,000 units. And if Red Hook doesn't want to turn into Long Island City, on the EDC website, they put in 5,000 units there, and 60% affordable, whereas in Red Hook, they're pitching 13,000 and 25% affordable. So I guess I just want, and also the BMT, the EDC, the New York City Economic Development Corporation that's running this project, in workshops that I've attended, they're excluding transit from this. Once the housing is in, then the transit can come, but it's like obvious that it's so urgently needed because all of us in Red Hook know that this is a transit desert. So can you talk about how important it is for all of these things to happen in tandem? And also the BMT is happening separately from the BQE thing. Like they're not looking at these projects as connected and cohesive. So can you talk about how important it is for transit to happen in tandem if all this housing is gonna go in, which as we know in New York, it's probably gonna happen, and just how important it is for it to go in before, because also what's unique that the Robert Moses thing is, the Robert Moses book also brings up is that a lot of these projects, like there's no housing in a lot of this redevelopment, so it's raw. So we have the opportunity to create housing and transit in tandem. So yeah.
Thank you, Melissa, for that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if New York could still build trains.
Because there's no housing there, it'd be so affordable.
Well, and the closest we've seen is de Blasio's, what was it called? The tram, the BQ.
The BQX.
which wasn't really a serious proposal.
I guess more
Yeah,
about
that's-
how.
But that
is
is
a
dead,
dead
and
project.
And
that
that
was,
was a Two Trees real estate developer project.
More so how important transit is to accommodate that much density that they're pitching.
oh, of course. I mean, I think that we haven't built, like back in the day, you know, you look at photos of the 7 train being built. There's a very famous photo of the viaduct along Queens, far around on Queens Boulevard. And it's like farmland. Back in the day, we used to do development-oriented transit versus transit-oriented development that we do now, where you densify around existing stations. But back in the day, when it was private companies, we would do development-oriented transit. I won't talk about it right now. We have someone from South Florida here.
Great place.
It is a great place, who's worked on Brightline. And Brightline is, well, I'm not going to do it. But no, I mean, I don't know exactly how to respond other than saying, yeah, it would be awesome if we extended the 1 train or whatever. Well, the 1 train extension is kind of complicated. Red Hook, yeah, I'm not super familiar with the BMT proposal, I'll be honest.
Just more like a bus, or the fact that like it's important for it to happen before the development is there, before the housing is
Of course,
there. We
absolutely.
need a regional plan, which is exactly what RPA suggested to Robert Moses, that then shot down. So like it's history reading itself, honestly.
We're so balkanized at this point. Like, there is very little relationship between housing development and transit development. And this is true in New York, this is true across the country. You know, Los Angeles is undergoing this massive expansion of their metro system, the largest in the country.
So that's only because of the Olympics.
No, it's been going on since the 90s,
But
since
largely-
Mayor Bradley.
So let's
Well,
get
there's
some
28 by 28.
more questions on the
We'll talk about that.
floor.
Come,
And
Back here.
hello.
name?
But
I can't see you.
just to put a bow on the point, they're building this transit without changing the zoning codes.
Yeah.
And so it is great for contractors,
Right.
you know, people who work for big engineering firms like me. We're not working on the LA Metro, but it is a waste of, I don't want to say waste, but it is, they're not going to get the full value out of their investment. And here they're doing the opposite. In Red Hook, they're building all this housing without transit. And what are they
They
going to
want to, it's not.
yeah. And what are they going
There's a
to
desire.
rely on the de Blasio ferries? Yeah.
Right. Let's get some more questions on the table here. Name and question. I can't see you, but
Adam.
Adam.
Oh,
Your name is Adam.
Rochester. I'm from upstate New York. Every major city along I-90 in New York, upstate New York, they're all considering doing what Rochester has done. And Rochester's also considering removing the rest of, they've only removed half of the southern half. Syracuse is in the process of removing it. They're getting a lot of pushback from, I don't want to say that because it labels it. Buffalo is considering removing the 33. Albany is not really seriously considering removing 787. Schenectady is already most of the way removing 890. So, and Utica, I mean, they have one, but it's silly. Well, it's all silly. But have you looked into the impacts specifically in the United States for what Rochester has done and Syracuse is doing relative to what's happened in what you brought up in Utrecht, Seoul, to some extent in Paris, and then also Buenos Aires, it's all over the world seems to be doing it except for, I don't know, this place.
We are, I mean, New York seems to be doing it. Syracuse, I'm very, on paper that's a great plan. I know there's a lot of back and forth about it, but the community grid plan that's what you're referring to, that's an excellent plan. Sorry, what was the question? Sorry.
What was the question?
Well, I mean, the question is.
Have you seen impacts,
Oh,
positive impacts from Rochester that you think can be extrapolated to cities like Cincinnati, Kansas City, Chicago, New York, Boston, all over the country?
Absolutely. In Rochester, I'm actually doing a study right now looking at the census tracts adjacent to the portion of the highway that was removed, looking at it before and after in terms of environmental metrics and social metrics. So environmental metrics are PM 2.5, particulate matter that particularly comes from tailpipe emissions, that's PM 2.5. Noise pollution. So in Rochester, I'm doing this study currently. PM 2.5 went down in the adjacent census tracts by 38 percentage points. 38 percentage points, and I compared that to a control group elsewhere in the city just to make sure that it wasn't due to, increased or better standards for emissions. So indeed, in Rochester, the PM 2.5 went down 38 percentage points. Noise pollution obviously went down considerably. I am hesitant to say that that's the solution for everywhere. Again, because I don't know why I'm defending highways, but in some places there is a need for commercial throughput. Now look, he should not have built it, Robert should not have built it where he built it, but the fact of the matter is it's here, and some people rely on it, but we have seen promising results from these strategies in terms of environmental impact. There's Boston. Boston's always the other one, that's the capping example. And that's a famously bad example, right? So we see how not to do it.
You're talking about the big dig?
The big dig, the big dig. Well, because the disaster with the Central Artery Tunnel was the elevated structure went from 3 lanes on either side to 5 lanes on either side. So now it is a 10-lane underground highway. And the Rose Kennedy Greenway is fine. It is certainly better than what was there before, but it is also a series of isolated parks surrounded by, they didn't just bury the highway, they then built a 3-lane on either side boulevard. I mean, I like the word boulevard, so I don't want to say, but Service road, Strode, for those of us familiar with that. Yeah, it sounds exciting. 3 lane on either side Strode. And then the Rose Kennedy Greenway is periodically punctuated by off-ramps. So, did Boston need I-95 going right through the middle of it? Absolutely not. That's not industrial land. That is commercial, and it was residential. It's now mostly commercial. But they have no need for a 10-lane highway going through the middle. Does the Brooklyn Navy Yard need a highway going by it? Maybe. Again, I don't know why I'm defending highways here. I'm so sorry. But with the Blue Highways program, and I haven't talked about that yet, with the Blue Highways program, we can really get a lot of that freight off of the highway.
Rotterdam's a great example of that.
Thank you. Exactly. And thank you for teaming me up for that. Rotterdam, where I live, it's the largest port in Europe, and they have a quote-unquote blue highway. I can see the river from my apartment. I'm very lucky. But we see all of these small container ships. So they go to the port of Rotterdam. It's down the river. These big container ships coming from here, coming from China, and then they switch over to little boats. They're not that little, but these smaller ships that then deal with local freight. Some of it's going all the way down to Germany, and some of it's going to Belgium, but a lot of it is going right here to Rotterdam, and they have these little hubs right along the waterfront in former industrial land, where I love watching this, where you see the ships offload onto little trucks, not the full-sized inner-city tractor trailers that for some reason we insist
53-foot monsters.
that for some reason we insist should go everywhere. They switch them onto these little trucks, and it's an incredible. I get Amazon deliveries just as quickly. Did that answer the question?
Was that pro Amazon? We're gonna pause.
I'm not pro Amazon.
Let's just get some more questions because I think we're kind of at time, and I wanted to.
So this is why I like making the video. I can just press play and I don't have to.
Okay, Victoria has another question here.
Hi, my name's JJ. Sorry, I'm sealed. The 20-year period that the BQE and other of Robert Moses' project coincided with like a big economic transformation in New York City. As we know, we're not doing so much manufacturing here anymore. How do you think that related to the transition towards car-based infrastructure? Was there any sort of causal relationship, or is it just two separate phenomena?
Well, the James Sanders was saying, the BQE to some, and this is why they went through residential areas. The BQE to some extent was planned as a means to support the industrial waterfront along Brooklyn. And to some extent, it succeeded, to some extent. Industry did hang on longer here than in a lot of places. And the Navy Yard is still active.
So was it support industry?
The BQE, yes.
Manufacturing.
Manufacturing, exactly. It was designed to create a through route, again, from the mainland to New England and then to Long Island that avoided Manhattan. And to some extent, it was successful in that role, and that is why the protests to move it to the industrial waterfront fell on deaf ears. I mean, it's also because he hated those people, but he didn't want to build through the industry, the industrial areas, because those were his benefactors to some extent. This is the story of why the the Cross Bronx doesn't go right through the middle of Breton Park. Not that would be great, but it at least wouldn't have destroyed all of East Tremont. And it's because he had industrial supporters in Morsania, along 3rd Avenue there, 3rd Avenue to the north. So the BQE to some extent prolonged the industrial nature of the waterfront, which is tough to say. I mean, people can take them or not, but they will. But no, the switch, the deindustrialization, that's part of a much larger trend. That's part of a much larger trend of urban deindustrialization. That's part of globalization to some extent. But urban centers lost a lot of industrial jobs to the suburbs. And that's less true in New York because of the strict zoning in Long Island and in Westchester. But in cities around the country, industrial jobs moved out to the suburbs. Unions at the time were segregated, so they to some extent supported that. I'm very pro-union, but there's a complicated history here. Trying to be nuanced. But it didn't lead to deindustrialization. If anything, it prevented it from happening to some extent a little sooner.
Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Spencer. I live here in Red Hook. When someone brought up the B61 bus, that's my usual bus route. It got me thinking about the transit options here. And I was just, thinking, I've been taking the bus from like Lower Manhattan to Staten Island, that Sim 1 bus, and you can almost get to Staten Island faster than you can get to Red Hook. And so my twofold part question is, Carlos, when I moved to Red Hook, the New York City area was pretty new. I don't know if you had an involvement in that, but it was one of the things that made Red Hook, it increases, access, I think, for a lot of people to get to different parts of the city. But I was wondering, and I looked a little bit into initiatives of like a bus route, like using the Hugh Carey Tunnel to actually, increase access from Red Hook to there. I don't know what the status of that project is. And then I guess the second part of the question would be for Adam was, Robert Moses and the Hugh Carey Tunnel being like his, grand vision into the Lower Manhattan. During your research for the film, did you ever see, how did those bus routes get, some of them are using it, but for a neighborhood like Red Hook, do you ever see that it could actually, be like with on ramps, off ramps, like how could that actually work for a neighborhood like ours?
So I'll go first with the idea. It's an idea that's kind of been around. There's a lot of support for it. There's a big coalition effort. I don't know about the last few years. It's all a budget issue in terms of where it gets paid for. The MTA is not interested in increasing bus routes, especially something so specific like this because of use. Those are all the issues that they gave at the beginning. And even the 61 and the 53, I think it is, 57, the 57 is here. The 53 is on 3rd Avenue in Sunset Park. That got refunded after a lot of pressure. And even the numbers coming back from that route are low. And when there's a budget cut, those are the first places that they go to. It's decisions and whether or not we subsidize public transportation. Hopefully with congestion pricing, this idea can become real. So let's keep congestion pricing.
I think if you want to get involved, Transportation Alternatives that's a big initiative for Transportation Alternatives, along with the Red Hook Action group is trying to push the express bus from Red Hook to Manhattan. So hopefully.
Thank you for bringing that up.
The extent to which Moses was concerned about buses is reflected in the Port Authority bus terminal. No, I'm serious. And the George Washington Bridge one, which is actually a bit nicer. It's Nervy, the architect. But no, he did not care about buses. Absolutely not. And he bragged about, the time he was building, there were still streetcars. There were still trolleys.
Do you know why he hated buses so much?
The same reason he hated, the same reason he didn't like the subways. They were privately run, and he did not like the community that it made possible. He didn't like the density that it supported. He did not care about buses. The buses at the time were still run by, they were mostly trolleys. There was the big three, the BMT, the IMD, which is public technically, and then the IRT. No, he didn't think about that at all. He was forced to think about that sometimes. It's a similar situation in DC and San Francisco, the cities that were undergoing urban renewal, federal highway construction, but were established, were old, dense, had a geographic basis, versus like Houston and Miami. I hate to say that about Miami, but it's true. So no, he wasn't concerned about that. He wasn't concerned about providing options. It was all about, I mean, we know the famous story. I haven't even everyone here knows the famous story about the buses, along the LIE, they made the bridges too low. For the buses to fit under, if folks aren't familiar. He specifically made the bridges too low so that public transit could not get to Jones Beach and Moses Beach. No, I mean, maybe he did think about it in a pejorative way, but no, he really had no, and it's not that there weren't plans out there. The IMD, again, nominally a public system created by Mayor Hyland, had these incredible plans for expansion, of which obviously the Second Avenue subway is the most famous, but none of those came to fruition. And as I say, the subways, he viewed them as something that would take away from his power, as something that would take away from his infrastructure, and he did not care about low-income people. That was really the thrust of it.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
One more?
One more, and then we can wrap this up. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Holly.
Holly.
This is a softball and quick one, but is
I love softballs.
is the documentary available for streaming so we can share it with other people?
Okay, it's not a softball. No.
Not yet.
That's a Janet question.
Yeah.
Sorry, Janet. We are planning on doing a virtual screening, so you don't have to physically be here in person, but not at the moment. But eventually it'll be on YouTube. And then
We'll stay in touch with you because we all have your email addresses since you are
Well, there you go.
tonight, and we'll share them with Jan to make sure you guys can share this with your loved ones. So, family sharing of BQE disaster.
As we wrap up, I'm going to give you one last question to riff off of, and that is, what's the one thing that you were surprised by the most in digging in and putting this thing together? One thing that surprised you the most?
with the BQE in particular,
The story of the BQE.
the story of the BQE. I mean, I guess the callousness, in a lot of these, on Segregation by Design, I talk a lot about highways being built through immigrant communities, through non-white communities. And they're normally 2 miles long. What this one is 10 miles long? I don't know the exact, the sheer extent of the destruction in New York with the BQE and the Cross Bronx is flooring. And it really created a baseline that other cities could emulate without ever really exceeding, because it's New York.
We go
It's
big here.
Exactly. The only city that got close was LA, and that's different. And that's in the number of buildings destroyed, but not necessarily in the number of people displaced. New York, what's surprising about the BQE is the sheer magnitude, is the sheer scale of 250,000 people. It boggles the mind, and in Miami, it was 50,000. And these are all rough. The reason these numbers are perfect is, again, because you have to apply a multiplier to the census data, because they were measuring households, not individuals. And it's surprising, but here it's like a war. It's the biggest population move, the biggest urban population move ever outside of natural disaster or war.
Yeah, forced.
Forced, exactly. With basically, I guess this is one of the things that surprised me. Well, in addition to that, but the folks who, when your house gets taken through eminent domain, I didn't even mention that, but when that's the mechanism by which, you know, the government seizes the property. There is a requirement for quote unquote just compensation. So, two things. The government decides, they're the ones assessing the value of the property when they do this. And then that just compensation goes to the owner.
Not the renter.
Not the renter, which is all of these people. And this goes back to redlining. You know, redlining said that neighborhoods that had a high population, not even high populations, that had really any amount of non-white people, you could not get financial services in those neighborhoods. You couldn't get loans, you really couldn't open a bank account, you couldn't get basic, but you had to, if you had money, you had to just put it away in your mattress, basically. And what that means for the people who live there is that they are just always, they can never buy their own house, ever. So they're always beholden to some landlord that lives elsewhere. And then when these highways come through, they're the ones that get paid. And I guess another thing that was surprising, and I'll end soon, I'm sorry, was the sort of glee to which a lot of these people accepted the buyouts. There's an excellent book. It is about Miami, but it really applies to all American cities. Miami isn't as special as it thinks it is. But it's called A World More Concrete by Nathan Connolly. I always recommend that book. Sorry, that's a friend of mine. And in Overtown, the neighborhood that was destroyed, the property owners were actually lobbying for urban renewal because they viewed it as a way to cash out. And that was the case in a lot of neighborhoods here. The people who own these places didn't live there, and they weren't allowed to because they didn't have access to the mortgages, the financial services that would make that possible. So that's surprising. Is the just compensation went to people who live in, you know, the Upper East Side.
Because then the government would say like, oh, this neighborhood blighted, they would undervalue.
Well, so it's both those things. So A, it was undervalued, they would undervalue it in the first place. And then the people who owned it didn't really care. It was a source of income for them, but here's a lump sum that's still pretty nice. So they just took it. And it was a way, again, to cash out.
Yeah, well, that's what happened at the Atlantic Drives, at least. They used to come in
Sure.
doing-
Oh yeah, which is another film that was part of the series
Yeah.
as well. Let's pause here, let's continue the conversation. I want to say thank you to Adam for not just creating this film, but for inviting us into this world that he created with so many amazing people. Let's give him a round of applause. Let's give a round of applause to Janet, Fink, and the team here. Institute for Public Architecture and the NYU real estate team.
Schack.
Schack is also, give a round of applause. Victoria. Brazilian Red Hook.
Yeah.
And I want to just say this as a kind of final thought, as someone who's in government and just saw a lot of how the sausage is made, the callousness that surprised you is alive and well even today. But it is still a human response with human infrastructure that gets displayed in power. And so we can change that. We can make that different. I know it doesn't feel like that right now as we're seeing the decay of the federal government, wherever side you fall on. I think I have a clue about what side. But these are all people institutions. You can make a difference, and that starts here in your local neighborhood. And there's some stuff happening here that is real, and it's going to need your help. And that's how you win. This is how you win these fights. This is how you beat rapper Moses of today. And I think we're just getting better. So just stay involved. All politics is local. Let's rock it. Thank you.
Green Love Studios for having us tonight. Thank you so much. You guys can put events here if you're interested.
Green Love, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you. And also, there are 2 filmmakers in the back doing a documentary about the green future of New York City. So if you're interested in talking to them and being in their documentary or have expertise in environmental and climate change, please talk to them. They're at the back.